In the summer of 2021, the Taliban swiftly retook power of Afghanistan. In order to understand what happened, we must understand what the Taliban is, how it came to be, what it believes in, to which opposition it arose, the ideology to which it adheres, and how it gained followers. In 1978, the Afghan Communist Party, supported by the Soviet Union, took power of Afghanistan. They implemented progressive policies, women's rights, and increased equality, but at the same time they cracked down extremely hard and violently on opposition and dissent. This upset many Afghans, who fiercely opposed the rulers, including President Hafizullah Amin. Their Soviet neighbors feared losing an ally in Afghanistan. They feared Islamic uprisings in their Central Asian territories, or a full-blown revolution as had just happened in Iran. And they feared the Americans exploiting a volatile Afghanistan to decrease Soviet influence in the region. As a result of this, the USSR invaded Afghanistan in 1979.
Troops in Afghanistan are reported to be spreading out across the country and engaging the Muslim rebels.
Many Afghans opposed the invasion, and quickly, young fighters united across the country. Foreign fighters from many Muslim countries joined them in the insurgency against the imperialist power. As Muslims, they felt called to fight the imperialists. They felt called to jihad. They united in their opposition to the secular Soviets, and they hoped to establish an Islamic state in Afghanistan. These fighters became known as the Mujahideen. They fought ferociously against the Soviets, with support from Pakistan, the United States, Saudi Arabia, and other countries who provided arms and dollars in their fight against the spread of communism. Different groups, led by different warlords, fought in the decade-long war. One of these Mujahideen was a guy who would later make the Americans turn against the Mujahideen. The Soviets had one major advantage. They were able to attack the Mujahideen from the air. That was, until the United States, under codename Operation Cyclone, provided the Mujahideen with thousands of Stinger missiles. These surface-to-air missiles enabled the Mujahideen to shoot down helicopters and planes, and this became a turning point in the war, and in 1989, the Soviets acknowledged that the war would never end, and they withdrew their forces from the country. The Mujahideen agreed on fighting the Soviets, but that was about everything they agreed on. As soon as the USSR left the country, a civil war ensued. At this point, the USSR-supported communist government was fighting against a fragmented landscape of Mujahideen factions. Different warlords fought the government until it fell in 1992. Then began a struggle for power between the Mujahideen groups and their leaders, the most famous of which were Gulbuddin Hekmatyar and Ahmed Shah Massoud. In the meantime, Afghans grew weary of the Mujahideen, their never-ending clashes and corruption. One man in particular was able to capitalize on this. His name was Muhammad Omar. He began gathering supporters for his movement and would later become known as Mullah Omar. He had fought the Soviets in the 80s and had been trained in camps in Pakistan funded by the US. Many of his supporters had grown up in refugee camps in Pakistan, and many of the young people there had no parents and had seen nothing but war in their lives. In other words, they were ripe for radicalization. Specifically, they were being trained in the Islamic movement of Deobandi. Deobandi is a branch of Islam that arose in 1800s India in opposition to British rule. The movement was fiercely anti-colonialist, as it saw British rule as corrupting the purity of Islam. Traditionally, it aims to create a revivalist Islamic society free from westernization and Western imperialism. The Deobandi schools in Pakistan were heavily funded by Saudi Arabia and the United States. Among other things, the United States provided the schools with textbooks that instilled in its young pupils a hatred of foreign invading powers. Mullah Omar named his newfound movement Taliban, aptly meaning students. In 1994, the Taliban took power of Kandahar. They presented stability instead of the chaos that Afghanistan had been ravaged by for decades. And they presented a strict Islamic system of governance. More so, they weren't foreign imperialists, and they were popular among many Afghans. In 1995, they took Herat, and in 1996 they took Kabul, hung ex-president Mohammad Najibullah, and established the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. They imposed their extremely strict version of Sharia law in Afghanistan and were the de facto leaders of the country. The Taliban banned almost all entertainment, required women to be completely covered, robbed women of all self-determination, and implemented harsh physical punishments for crimes, including public executions. Then in 2001, this happened. The man behind the attacks sheltered in the mountains of Tora Bora. The Taliban refused to extradite him without proof of his involvement.
We will make no distinction between the terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbor them.
This led the United States to invade Afghanistan, thus launching Operation Enduring Freedom. The Taliban lost control, and Osama bin Laden fled into the mountains of Pakistan. Later that year, Mullah Omar surrendered in Kandahar, but reportedly fled through the desert on a motorbike. The Taliban were decimated by US bombs, but civilian Afghans also paid the price for the attacks that had unfolded thousands of kilometers away and that no Afghan had played a role in. While thousands of Taliban fighters were killed, wounded or captured, almost the entire leadership of the Taliban survived. For 20 years, US and allied troops controlled the country, but at the same time the Taliban slowly regained strength. As soon as American troops left the country in 2021, the Taliban swiftly regained control. To sum up, the Taliban arose from the chaos of the Soviet invasion, and it arose from environments that had been funded and supported by the United States for years.
I expressed our nation's continued strong support for the resistance.
Years later, the US became the foreign invader they themselves had supported the Mujahideen against earlier. For twice as long as the Soviets, the US fought a futile fight in which the Taliban remained, Osama bin Laden got away and lived for 10 years, and thousands of Afghans got to know the US as a foreign power that invades, kills, and leaves.